Welcome back, everyone, to the Elder Confessions channel. While I was away on a business trip, my mother and sister-in-law locked my wife inside for 3 days. They claimed that was the only way to discipline a daughter-in-law. I immediately bought a flight back that very night and did something that left them both stunned. My name is Dad, I am 36 years old, and I work as a technical manager for a private home appliance company. My job isn't exactly flashy, but I often have to travel to provinces to inspect machinery. I check production lines and resolve technical issues that the workshop team can't handle themselves. My wife is named Thou, she's 31, and she works as a warehouse accountant for a small hardware store. Thou isn't the sharp-tongued type, nor is she someone who likes to compete or argue. She is gentle and patient, so consider it that I often have to remind her. It's good to be kind, but don't let people think you're a pushover. At the time, we were still living with my mother, Mrs. Kean, and my older brother's family. My mother has been a widow for a long time and is quite rigid, firmly believing that a daughter-in-law must be submissive, keep her head down, and put her husband's family first. Then there is my sister-in-law, Hong, my brother Kai's wife, who is always sweet as honey to my face. When I'm around, she says she treats Thou like a sister, but whenever I'm away, she picks fights and provokes her, putting Thou in awkward positions more times than I can count. That particular business trip was scheduled for 5 days. Before I left, Thou woke up early to prepare my clothes, stomach medicine, and carefully pack every file into my briefcase. She stood at the door to see me off, smiling softly. "Don't worry about things here. Mom and my in-laws are here to help." At the time, I believed her. I believed it because, despite the occasional domestic friction, they were still my family. I never expected that my complacency would force Thou to endure 3 days of terror. On the third night of my trip, just after I finished a meeting with the technical team, my phone vibrated. Thou's name appeared on the screen, but it wasn't a call. It was a very short voice message. I pressed play, and from the speaker came the sound of labored breathing and choked sobs, as if someone were tightly gripping her throat. Then Thou's voice broke off. "Dad, help me, I'm locked in." That was it, the message stopped. I called back immediately, but it said the phone was unreachable. I called a second time, a third time, still nothing. My heart started racing. I called my mother. It rang for a long time before she picked up. Her voice was strangely calm. "Why are you calling so late? Can't you let me sleep?" Quote. I asked right away, "Mom, where is Thou? Why did she say she's locked in?" There was a silence on the other end for a few seconds, then my mother sighed, her voice cold. "Your wife is too disrespectful. Hong and I are just teaching her a lesson." I froze. I asked again, each word choking in my throat. "What do you mean by teaching her a lesson?" She answered curtly, "Locked in the storage room for a few days so she'll learn to be afraid. If you don't discipline a daughter-in-law from the start, she'll ride over everyone's heads later." I bolted from my chair, my whole body burning hot but my spine ice cold. I shouted, "Mom, open the door for Thou right now." Ms. Kean immediately snapped, "Go do your own work. Leave the women in this house for me to teach. You keep defending her, that's why she's spoiled." Quote. After saying that, she hung up. I immediately called Hong. She answered very quickly, her voice even sounding like she was laughing. "Dad, just focus on your work and don't worry. Thou is very stubborn. This is the only way to teach a daughter-in-law. Women who don't fear their husband's family will cause chaos later." I gritted my teeth and asked, "Tell me clearly, where is Thou?" Hong hesitated for a beat, then replied coldly, "At home. Where else? Don't blow things out of proportion. You panic the moment a woman cries." Quote. I didn't say another word. I immediately opened the home security camera app. The living room camera was showing, but no one was there. The backyard camera was pitch black. Looking closely, I realized the lens was covered by a cloth. The hallway camera showed a lost connection since the afternoon. A terrifying realization struck me. This was not a moment of sudden anger. They had covered the cameras, cut the internet, and taken Thou's phone. Everything was planned. That very night, I dropped all my work, called my partners to report a family emergency, and booked the earliest flight home. Before heading to the airport, I called Kwan, an old friend who works in law. I was brief. "Kwan, my wife might be locked up by my own family. I need you to prepare to help me. If this is serious, I won't settle it with an apology." Sitting in the car to the airport, I played Thou's voice message again. Her trembling voice echoed in the night. "Dad, please save me." My hand gripped the phone until it hurt. I looked out the window as the unfamiliar city slipped away, with only one thought in my mind. If anything happens to thou, whether it's my mother or my sister-in-law, I will make them pay. On the flight back, amidst the humming engines and the cold white cabin lights, I couldn't find any peace. I kept asking myself, when did all this start? Was it from the recent argument or long before that? From the day thou first stepped into my mother's house as a daughter-in-law. People usually only see tragedy once it has shattered right before their eyes. But in reality, before every storm, there are faint signs, only we are indifferent or choose to ignore them. After the wedding, I discussed moving out with thou. I didn't want her to live the life of a daughter-in-law in a shared house, especially since my mother is difficult. But my mother sighed back then, I'm old, your father passed early, the house is only warm with children around. She even held thou's hand in front of our relatives, her voice sounding very affectionate. Now that you're here, I consider you my daughter. I don't need much, just for you to stay so I'm not lonely. Quote, hearing that, thou softened immediately. She pulled my hand and whispered, let it be, honey. If mom says that, it would be cruel for us to move out. Thou not only agreed to stay but truly wanted to care for that home. My mother's old kitchen was cramped, the wooden cabinets were termite-ridden, and the gas stove had a slight leak. Thou used her savings to renovate it, buying stainless steel racks, new pots, and installing a ventilation fan because my mother often complained about cooking odors. She even bought mom an armchair to place by the window, saying it would help ease her back pain while drinking tea. At the time, mom seemed very happy on the outside, bragging to everyone who visited that her daughter-in-law was thoughtful and had already improved the kitchen. But later on, I discovered that behind thou's back, my mother spoke differently. I once accidentally overheard her telling Hong in the yard, she acts like that, but she might not be sincere. You have to be careful of people who are too quiet. Many young people are cunning now. They win your favor first and then take over everything in the house later. Hong, sitting next to her, immediately added on. You should keep an eye on her, Mom. Quiet people are hard to read, unlike me. I speak my mind. I don't know how to pretend. The two of them laughed together. I felt heartbroken hearing that, but at the time, I consoled myself, thinking it was just women gossiping and not worth getting upset over. Hong is the type of person who is very smooth talking. In front of me, she always called thou her sister-in-law and acted like they were close. Whenever there was a nice dish, she would serve it to thou in front of everyone. But as soon as I left for work, she would order thou around to do one thing after another. Sometimes she asked thou to pick up her kids from school, other times to cook extra for her family because she was busy bathing them. There were days when thou came home tired and hadn't even changed her clothes yet, when Hong would shout down from upstairs. Thou, could you kindly mop the living room for me? The baby spilled milk all over the floor. Thou told me about it, but she spoke of it very lightly. She didn't blame anyone, just saying Hong must really be busy with her kids, which is why she asked for help. Besides, she said, it doesn't hurt to help each other out while living under the same roof. I heard that and just advised her that if she was tired, she should refuse and not take everything on herself. But I was wrong. I was wrong to think these were just minor frictions between women in the same house. I was wrong because I didn't realize thou's patience was being seen by others as an obligation. My mother holds a very old-fashioned view. She often says that if a daughter-in-law earns a salary, she must contribute to her husband's family. Don't keep too much for yourself, or you'll get spoiled. Every month, thou still regularly pays for household expenses, utilities, groceries, and mom's arthritis medication. She quietly paid for many things without ever taking credit. Once when my mother had knee pain, thou bought supplements herself, booked an appointment at a private clinic, and took half a day off to take her. Yet back home, my mother just remarked that expensive medicine was probably just for show, as it wouldn't make much difference for an old person anyway. I was annoyed when I heard that, but thou held my hand to stop me. She whispered, let it go, dear. Mom is old, so it's normal for her to be a bit critical. That very phrase, let it go, haunted me later, because every time thou said it, someone else felt entitled to be even more unreasonable. Hong understood my mother's weaknesses very well. My mother liked to be flattered and praised for keeping the family in order, so Hong always chose her words carefully. She often hinted things to my mother. Daughters-in-law these days are very secretive with money. She looks gentle on the outside, but who knows how much she has in her account. Or sometimes, before a meal, she would smirk, thou is an accountant, after all. She must keep her money hidden well. It's hard for you to know anything, Mom. The peak was when thou sent money to her parents to repair their house in the countryside. Her parents lived in an old, run-down house where the roof leaked right onto their bed during the rainy season. Thou cared for them, so she dipped into her savings to send them some help. I don't know how Hong found out about that. She told my mother about it. That evening, my mother slammed her bowl onto the table, looked at thou, and said, "You're married, yet you're still sending money outside. Is this house lacking in opportunities for you to show your filial piety?" Thou blushed and explained timidly, "Mom, their roof leaks so much, and they are old, so I just sent a little to help." My mother gave a cold laugh. "How much is a little? Every cent you earn is thanks to this house, which gives you peace of mind to work. When a woman is married, she must prioritize gathering money for her husband's family first." That time I didn't hold back. I put down my chopsticks and said clearly, "Mom, it's money thou earned. She has the right to help her own parents. I married her, I didn't take her away to cut her off from her parents." Quote, the whole table went completely silent. My mother didn't argue further, just looked down and kept eating. But the way she looked at thou from that day on had changed, colder and deeper, like a thorn hidden beneath smoldering ashes. As for Hong, she started calling thou by a very unpleasant nickname, the calculating daughter-in-law. At first, she said it as a joke, but then it became her catchphrase. Every time the house needed money, she would glance at thou. "For this, you'd better ask thou. She's really good at saving money." The atmosphere in the house gradually became suffocating. And me, a husband who thought that standing up for his wife a few times was enough. Little did I know that behind those silent meals, my mother and sister-in-law had begun to view thou as someone who needed to be taught a lesson. About a week before that business trip, I started to notice something unusual about Hong. But back then, I wasn't observant enough to realize it was the sign of a trap. Normally, she rarely took the initiative to be close to thou. If there was work to be done, she'd call. If she needed something, she'd order. Otherwise, she usually maintained the superior air of the daughter-in-law who had been in the house longer. Yet, during that time, Hong suddenly became strangely sweet. In the morning, she'd invite thou to the market. In the afternoon, she'd text to ask, "Do you want anything, sister-in-law? I'll buy it for you." One day, she even took thou's arm in the yard, laughing and talking with my mother as if the two sisters-in-law truly loved each other. Thou was never a suspicious person. She was delighted to see Hong mellowing out. That night, thou said to me, "Hong has been easier to talk to lately, hasn't she? Maybe the women in the house just had misunderstandings before." I heard that and just smiled, saying it was good if everyone could get along. Thinking back now, I feel a heavy weight in my heart. Some people aren't kind for no reason. They only become soft when they need something from you. Hong began inviting thou to the market more often, to buy vegetables. She would ask if thou got a bonus on her salary that month, to buy clothes for her children. She would complain, "Everything is getting so expensive these days. Raising kids is so costly, you know." Then one day, while peeling fruit, she looked at thou and smiled. "Since you're an accountant, you must be really good at holding on to money. Unlike me, money just slips through my fingers." Those words sounded like jokes, but in reality, each one was a way to probe. One night when I was working overtime, only my mother, Hong, and thou were at home. Thou told me later that day, Hong called her into the room, closed the door very quietly, and lowered her voice as if afraid of being heard. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes red, twisting the corner of her shirt, saying that Kai had lost money in business. Their income had been unstable for months, and they hadn't even paid Pin's tutoring fees. Hong wiped away tears as she spoke. "I'm suffering so much, thou. Everyone thinks I'm living comfortably, but in truth, I'm at my wit's end." Thou felt sorry for her when she heard that. She asked how much was missing so she could figure out how to help within her means. Hong grabbed thou's hand, pleading, "Please lend me 60 million for now. I'll pay you back in 1, maybe 2 months at most." I don't dare ask Mom for fear of worrying her, and I can't tell Dad either, fearing he'll think we're living irresponsibly. 60 million is not a small amount for my wife and me. It was money we saved for months, set aside for something we both cherish deeply. Thou was silent for a long time before she gently replied, "Hong, I sympathize with your struggles, but that money is set aside for a personal matter, and I can't make that decision on my own." Hong immediately pressed, "What could be more important than family in need?" Thou choked up. Only after a long pause did she whisper, "Dad and I are planning to reapply to have a baby. I lost our last one, and the doctor said if we prepare well, we can try again." Quote. That was a wound thou rarely ever mentioned. The first miscarriage had left her devastated for nearly half a year. There were nights I would wake up to find Thou sitting alone in the room, her hand on her belly, tears falling silently. She always blamed herself, even though the doctor said it wasn't her fault. That money wasn't just cash. It was hope, a preparation for my wife and me to have the courage to start over. But upon hearing that, Hong not only lacked sympathy, her expression even changed. She pulled her hand back and gave a cold laugh. If you don't have kids yet, why hold on to that money so tightly? You don't care about the people right in front of you, yet you worry about things that might not even happen. That sentence cut straight into Thou's heart like a blade. She burst into tears right there in the room but still shook her head, saying, "I'm sorry, I can't lend you this money. I would only consider it if Dad agrees." That single sentence made Hong reveal her true colors. She stood up abruptly, her voice no longer sounding sweet. "So it turns out that in this house, you only listen to your husband. I told you how difficult things were, yet you're still being calculating. It's true that you only see someone's true nature when money is involved." Thou tried to explain, but Hong opened the door and walked straight out, and from that moment, the trap began to tighten. Hong told my mother about it, but she didn't tell the truth. She said Thou had money but didn't want to help them, and even used the children as an excuse to keep her wealth. She even embellished the story by saying Thou claimed our money had nothing to do with my family. My mother was truly enraged when she heard that. She already had issues with Thou keeping money separately, and now she was being provoked further. The fire inside her flared up immediately. The next evening, during dinner, my mother put down her chopsticks and asked Thou in front of everyone, "I heard you have a separate savings account?" Thou froze and looked at me as if asking for help. I was also surprised because this should have been a private matter between the two of us. My mother continued, "Your brother's family is struggling, my grandchild lacks tuition, yet you have money and just ignore it. And you call this being part of the same family?" I was about to speak up, but Thou gently answered first. "Mom, it's not that I don't want to help, but Dad and I have already planned for that money." She scoffed, saying whatever the plan was, it should be kept by her for peace of mind. Young women holding on to too much money easily become selfish. Hong sat next to her and pretended to sigh. "Mom is right. If Thou gives the book to Mom to keep, everyone will stop worrying." I put my bowl down and said firmly that no one is to keep Thou's book. That money belongs to the two of us. If there's anything else, wait until we're back at our place to talk. My mother's face darkened. Hong lowered her head, but the corners of her mouth curled up ever so slightly. I didn't realize that my attempt to defend my wife had only made them even angrier. In my mother's eyes, I was no longer an obedient son, but a man led around by his wife's nose. In the days that followed, the pressure became public. Every time my mother saw Thou, she would ask about the passbook. "What harm could it do to let your mother hold it for a few days?" Hong would make snide remarks, saying that those without children are always stingy with their money, fearing no one will care for them later. Every word stabbed at Thou's deepest pain. She called me, her voice very soft, "Honey, should I just give it to Mom for safekeeping so the house can be at peace?" I immediately said, "No, absolutely do not give it to her. Wait until I return from my business trip, and I will handle it clearly." I thought I was protecting my wife, but I didn't know that on the other end of the line, my mother and Hong had been standing outside the door and heard almost everything. Hong spoke to my mother in an agitated voice. "Did you see that, Mom? Dad listens to his wife more than he listens to you now. If you don't teach her a lesson before he gets back, don't expect to have a say in this house ever again." And she, fueled by the pride of a mother who was always used to her son's obedience, believed her. She became convinced that she had to teach Thou a lesson before I returned. As for me, the husband far away, I had no idea that just a few days later, my words, "wait until I return," would become the very reason they treated my wife so cruelly. On the morning I left for my business trip, before it was even fully light, Thou was already up. I heard the sound of her opening the closet ever so softly. Then came the quiet zip of the suitcase in the dim, dark room. I opened my eyes and saw Thou sitting at the foot of the bed, carefully folding each shirt and placing it into my suitcase. Next to it was a bag of stomach medicine, some ginger tea packets, and a power bank, along with a stack of documents I needed to take for the production line inspection. Watching my wife fussing over me like that, I felt both love and peace of mind. I sat up and joked, "I'm only going for a few days, you're preparing like I'm leaving for a whole month." Thou looked up and smiled, a gentle smile, though her eyes were a bit tired from the tension in the house these past few days. She replied, "You always forget your medicine. If I don't prepare it, you'll skip meals, get a stomachache, and then call to complain to me." I pulled her down to sit beside me, telling her over and over, I won't be home, so if anything happens, call me immediately, don't suffer alone. Did you hear me? Thou nodded. She even adjusted my collar, saying softly, just focus on your work. Quote, Mom and your sister are here at home. I'll be fine. That very sentence later became like a thorn in my heart. At the time, I believed her. I believed that although my mother was strict, she wouldn't be excessive. I believed that even though my sister Hong was petty, she wouldn't cross any lines. I believed that with my own family in the house, my wife would be safe. But life is often painful in that the people who cause us the most regret are the very ones we trusted the most. I arrived at the airport near 7 o'clock. Before entering the security gate, I video called Thou. She was standing in the kitchen, and in the background, I could hear my mother calling out to ask if the porridge was ready. Thou smiled at me and said, Go on inside or you'll be late. I'm making porridge for Mom and then I'll head to work. I looked at that gentle face through the screen, feeling a sudden unease, but work was so urgent that I just gave her a few final reminders and hung up. That very afternoon, just as I landed at my destination, my mother began calling Thou down to the living room. Only after hearing Thou recount it later could I truly picture that scene. The living room was brightly lit, the ceiling fan turning slowly, and a handwritten paper was already placed on the table. My mother sat in the center chair, her face cold as if she had been waiting for a long time. Sister Hong sat beside her, phone in hand, camera open, just waiting to record the moment Thou signed the paper. As soon as Thou walked downstairs, she sensed something was wrong. She asked, Did you call for me, Mom? Without beating around the bush, Mrs. Kian pushed the paper in front of her. Sign it. From now on, give me your savings book to keep. Young women keeping too much money only leads to trouble. Thou picked up the paper to read it, her face turning pale. The content wasn't just asking her to hold it for safekeeping. It explicitly stated that Thou voluntarily surrendered her savings book and withdrawal rights to her mother-in-law for the common good of the family. Thou put the paper down, trying to keep her voice gentle. Mom, I can't sign off on this money matter by myself. This is a private plan between my husband and me. Once Dad gets back, we'll talk to you about it. My mother's face darkened immediately. She slammed her hand on the table, making the teacup rattle. What is that supposed to mean? Am I not your mother-in-law, and do I not have the right to ask about money in this house? Seeing my mother get angry, Hong jumped in right away. She set her phone on the table but kept the camera pointed at Thou. Her voice was sweet but venomous. Thou, dear, Mom is speaking so gently, yet you still talk back. Mom is just holding the money for safekeeping, it won't disappear. Or are you afraid that once you give it up, you won't have a way to hide it for yourself? Thou shook her head. Her eyes were already red. I am not hiding anything, but that money is what my husband and I saved for our treatment. You know that. Hong smirked. Treatment, always treatment. There's no sign of a baby. Yet you cling to that money so tightly. While real people living in this house need help, you choose to ignore them. Those words struck right at Thou's pain. Her voice trembled. Please don't say that. Our plans to have a child are not for you to mock. Mrs. Kian heard this and jumped up, pointing her finger at Thou. How dare you talk back to your sister-in-law? Do you think you can say whatever you want just because Dad isn't home? Thou panicked and took out her phone to call me, but as soon as she tapped my name, Hong lunged and snatched it away. Why call Dad? Going to tattle to your husband again? You're really something. Can't even handle a family matter without trying to drag your husband home to back you up. Thou reached out to get her phone back. Give it back to me. I have the right to call my husband. But Hong stepped back, hiding the phone behind her back. My mother stepped forward, and in an uncontrollable rage, she slapped Thou. Not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to leave her stunned. She gritted her teeth and said, Your husband isn't here, so don't think you have someone to back you up. Today I have to teach you who the elder is in this house. Thou held her cheek, tears streaming down, but she still shook her head. Mom, I won't sign it. I haven't done anything wrong. That very sentence drove Hong into a frenzy. She turned to my mother, her voice hardening. Do you see now, Mom? Talking nicely doesn't work with her. With this type, you have to play hardball. With that, Hong grabbed Thou's wrist and dragged her toward the back of the house. Thou struggled to break free, but how could she alone resist two people who were furious and had prepared for this in advance? The back shed was a place for old junk, boxes, and unused items. It had an iron door and always smelled musty during the rainy season. The moment Thou saw them dragging her in that direction, she was truly terrified. She cried out, Mom, Hong, what are you two doing? Let me go. But my mother only replied coldly, Stay in there and think. Once you're ready to be reasonable and sign, then you can come out. Thou tried to cling to the doorframe, but Hong yanked her hand away forcefully. The two of them shoved Thou inside, and the iron door slammed shut. My mother locked the bolt from the outside, while Hong carefully added a second padlock to the latch. The dry, sharp sound of the locks echoed, cutting off all of Thou's pleas from inside. Thou pounded on the door, calling out, "Mom, please, open the door." "Hong, give me back my phone, I can't breathe." Standing outside, Hong said with an overbearing tone, "If you can't breathe, then sign the papers. We aren't hitting or scolding you, we're just letting you sit there and think. It's only 3 days, you won't die." My mother added one more sentence that still makes my blood run cold whenever I hear it in the recording. This is the only way to teach a daughter-in-law. Once she's scared, she'll know how to obey later. After that, Hong used Thou's own phone to text me, "I'm a bit tired, I'll probably sleep early. Just keep working, don't worry." She thought that would be the end of it. But in her rush, Hong didn't know that before her phone was snatched, Thou had managed to turn on the recorder, and that very recording later became the dagger that overturned the entire scheme my mother and sister-in-law thought they could hide forever. On the first day of being locked up, Thou recounted that she could barely tell the time anymore. In that cramped shed, the only light that filtered in was a thin streak from a small ventilation gap near the ceiling. The vent is high above head height, covered in dust and cobwebs, so whether it's bright or dark outside, it's always gloomy and stifling in here. Thou pounded the door until her palms were raw, calling out, "Mom, please open the door for me." "Hong, I cannot sign those papers. Please, both of you, let me go." But instead of compassion, she was met with Hong's voice, cold and filled with contempt. "Keep screaming. Even if the neighbors hear, they'll just think we're fixing the door. You think anyone has time to meddle in someone else's family business?" Then came my mother's voice. She spoke slower, but it was even more chilling. "Stay in there and think about how a daughter-in-law who doesn't know her place needs to learn from scratch." Thou no longer had her phone, and her wallet had also been taken by Hong. The room key, the bike key, everything was gone from her possession. In the storage room, there were only old cardboard boxes, discarded fabric, and a broken fan, with a smell of damp cloth and rotting wood mixing together. As evening approached, the air grew even more suffocating. Thou suffered from stomach issues. If she missed a meal for too long, her stomach would cramp severely. Yet, from noon until night, no one gave her anything to eat. She sat down on the concrete floor, back against a box, arms clutching her stomach, her head dizzy. At times, Thou thought she would pass out. She tried to drag herself near the door, pressing her ear to listen to what was outside. The living room still had the sound of the TV, dishes clattering, and the laughter of Hong's son, Bin. Life out there was normal, while only she was left in this dark box like a criminal. Thinking of that, Thou no longer cried out loud. She just sat silently, tears flowing down on their own, because she understood that her cries for help were being deliberately ignored. By nightfall, the lock outside finally clicked, and the door opened a tiny crack. My mother stood outside, holding a water bottle and a plastic lunchbox. She didn't step in, just threw the two items onto the floor. The lunchbox hit the concrete and popped open, scattering a few cold grains of rice. She said, "Eat, get some strength so you can sign tomorrow. Don't put on a weak act to scare anyone." Quote, Thou tried to push herself up, her throat raspy and dry. "Mom, please, I haven't done anything wrong. Let me out. Let me wait for Dad to come home so we can all talk." Hong stood behind my mother, arms crossed with a cold smirk. "Waiting for Dad to come home so you can cry and make us look like the villains? It's not that easy. Sign it and you're free. If you're going to be stubborn, stay there and think about it." Thou looked at the two of them, a genuine fear rising in her for the first time. It wasn't a fear of being scolded or hated, but the fear that they viewed imprisoning a person as something perfectly normal. Before the door fully closed, Thou heard Hong whisper to my mother, "We have to force her to hand over the bank book before Dad returns. If he gets back, everything will be ruined." My mother replied, "Then we'll make her sign it tomorrow. She's been hungry all day, she won't be able to hold out much longer." Hong hissed, "Don't you go getting soft on me. They already said that if we don't have the money this week, they'll come to the house, and we won't be able to handle them." Thou froze. "Who are they? What money? Why does Hong's debt have anything to do with my savings book?" Then Thou heard my mother sigh, her voice full of irritation but not at all surprised. "I know. But you have to keep your mouth shut. If Dad finds out you borrowed that much, he won't forgive you." Just that one sentence was enough. Thou understood everything. My mother wasn't unaware. She knew Hong owed money. She knew they were desperate for cash, and she agreed to force Thou to sign not to discipline her daughter-in-law, but to take her money to save Hong. The door slammed shut, and the lock clicked into place once more. Thou sat motionless in the darkness, a cold meal beside her, a water bottle rolling at her feet. She realized she was no longer just a daughter-in-law being scolded for being disrespectful, but a target being hunted. They wanted her money, wanted our savings book, and wanted to use my absence to break her before I could return. In desperation, Thou began to grope around the storage room. It wasn't because she believed she could break the door down, but because her survival instinct wouldn't let her sit idly by and let others decide her fate. She rummaged through old cardboard boxes, finding some broken wires and my old technical notebooks, then suddenly her hand touched something cold. It was my old phone, the kind I used to take on job sites before forgetting it in the work bin after getting a new one. The screen was black. Thou pressed it repeatedly but nothing happened, her heart flickering with hope only to sink again. But right next to it, in an old cloth bag, she found a scratched power bank. Perhaps I had left it there after a machine inspection and forgotten about it. Thou tremblingly plugged in the cord. A long while later, the phone screen flickered weakly. The battery reached only 1 bar before dropping continuously. She didn't dare make a long call. Her hands shook so much she made mistakes. But finally, she managed to open the recorder to send me a voice message. Her voice then was hoarse, broken by thirst and fear. "Dad, save me, I've been locked in." As soon as the message was sent, the phone died, but that was enough to pull me away from my business trip. On my end, after hearing the message, every unusual detail immediately came to light. The camera was covered, the hallway connection lost. My mother and Hong gave evasive answers. The phrase, "locked in the storage room for a few days to learn a lesson," echoed in my head like the pounding of a hammer. I booked a flight for that very night and called Quan to ask him to prepare legal options. On the plane, I replayed that voice message countless times. Each time I heard Thou choking in the darkness, my heart tightened. I swore that this time, I would not only get my wife out of that warehouse but also expose the true faces of my mother and sister-in-law to everyone who thought they were decent people. The plane landed when it was almost midnight. As soon as the cabin door opened, I turned on my phone. There were no more missed calls from Thou. Her last voice message was still there, short and broken like a weak hand trying to reach out to me from the darkness. I dragged my suitcase and practically ran, not waiting to collect my checked luggage, nor did I have any mind left for the unfinished work behind me. It took over 40 minutes to get from the airport to the house. In the car, I didn't say a single word. The driver probably saw how tense I looked and didn't try to make conversation. I just stared out the window, burning with anxiety, phone in hand, Thou's message still open on the screen. Every time the car stopped at a red light, it felt like time was deliberately dragging on to test my patience. The car stopped at the end of the alley. I didn't have the driver pull up to the gate. I didn't want anyone inside to notice me yet. The alley was deserted at night, with yellow streetlights casting shadows on the patchy concrete. My house is at the very end of the lane. The familiar iron gate stood slightly ajar in the darkness. Usually, the backyard light would still be on at this hour because my mother is afraid of burglars. Yet that night, the whole house was pitch black, except for a faint sliver of light from the living room leaking through the curtains. I stood before the gate for a few seconds, my hand gripping the spare key tightly. I don't know why, but in that moment, the house I'd lived in for years suddenly felt terrifyingly foreign. I didn't ring the bell. I quietly inserted the key, opened the gate softly, and stepped inside. The night breeze swept across the yard, carrying the damp scent of the potted plants against the wall. Everything was deathly quiet, an unsettling silence that made me uneasy. The first thing I did was walk straight to the backyard. The camera mounted on the porch was still covered by a gray rag. I yanked the rag off, and the cold lens stared straight back at me. The signal light was blinking weakly. I turned to the hallway camera and saw the network cable had been pulled from the hub, dangling under the cabinet like a dead snake. There was no longer any doubt. They weren't just angry, they had intentionally blinded the whole house. Just then, a very faint sound echoed from the direction of the storage room. At first, I thought it was the wind hitting the iron door, but then the sound repeated. A weak, intermittent tapping, like someone with almost no strength left. I held my breath as I approached, and a hoarse, broken woman's voice came from inside. "Is anyone there? Open the door for me." My heart felt like it was being squeezed. I rushed straight to the storage room door. The iron door was secured with 2 padlocks. Outside, an iron bar had been jammed across the door latch. I called out, my voice nearly breaking. "Thou, I'm home. Thou, can you hear me?" It was dead silent inside for a few seconds, then a sob broke out, and Thou's voice drifted out, so weak I had to press my ear against the door to hear her clearly. "Dad, please help me." I could no longer keep my cool. I turned and bolted to the corner of the yard, grabbing the old crowbar kept next to the pile of bricks. With one hand I pried at the lock, while the other dialed a video call to Kwan. As soon as it rang, Kwan picked up. I said urgently, "Kwan, record this for me. I'm breaking into my own storage room. My wife is locked inside." Quote. Kwan on the other end immediately snapped to attention, his voice turning serious. "Dad, stay calm. Point the camera at the lock, the door, and the whole yard. Don't hang up." I followed his instructions, even as my hands shook with rage. The first padlock popped off after a few hard pries. The second lock was tougher. I had to grit my teeth and put all my strength into it. The sound of metal snapping rang out dryly in the middle of the night. The metal bar fell to the courtyard floor with a loud clang. I pulled the door open hard. The smell of mold, old paper, and the stale air of someone trapped for days rushed out, choking me. Thou was sitting on the floor against the wall, clutching her stomach, her messy hair matted to her face. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed, but she had almost no strength left to cry. Her lips were cracked, her face pale, and there were clear bruises on her wrists as if someone had gripped her very hard. As soon as she saw me, Thou tried to push herself up, but her legs gave way. I rushed forward to catch her. She collapsed into my arms, her body light and ice cold. "I thought you wouldn't make it back in time." That sentence made my throat tighten completely. I carried Thou out of the storage room. In the dim light from the phone, I saw on the floor a dried-up box of cold rice, a few scattered grains, a water bottle with only a little left, and next to it were moldy cardboard boxes piled in disarray. I panned the phone around so Kwan could record it all. Kwan said through the speaker, "Dad, take Thou to the hospital immediately, but remember to leave the scene exactly as it is, don't clean anything up." The sound of the broken locks and my shouting for Thou had finally woken the people in the house. The living room lights flickered on. My mother and Hong ran downstairs. Their clothes were disheveled, their faces still sleepy. But as soon as they saw me carrying Thou in my arms, they both froze as if nailed to the spot. My mother stammered, Why are you back at this hour?" I looked straight at her. Never in my life have I heard my mother's voice sound so cold. I answered, word by slow word, "If I hadn't come home, how much longer were you planning to lock my wife up?" Mrs. Kian opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Hong was quicker, immediately changing her tone, pointing at Thou. "Dad, don't listen to her. She crawled into the storage room to throw a tantrum herself. We only locked it from the outside because we were afraid she'd cause trouble." I turned to look at Hong. Her eyes darted away quickly, but her mouth kept trying to justify it. "She's so good at playing the victim. You were away on business, so you don't know." Thou was so weak in my arms she couldn't even protest. She just gripped my shirt, her whole body trembling. That very trembling made the anger in me turn ice cold. I understood that I couldn't lose control. I couldn't just rush in yelling or striking back and give them the upper hand. I just held Thou tighter, looking at each person in front of me, and said clearly, "From now on, no one touches my wife again. Not even a single word." My mother stammered, but I cut her off. "Save that for later. Right now, I'm taking Thou to the emergency room." I carried my wife to the gate, calling for a car as I walked. Hong tried to follow, but I turned back, my voice dropping low. "Stay right there, the scene is still intact. The security cameras, the lock, everything in the storage room. I have recorded it all. If you utter one more lie, I will let the law answer for me." Reaching the end of the alley, the car arrived. I placed Thou in the back seat and covered her with my jacket. Before closing the door, I looked back at the house, still lit up behind me. My mother stood on the steps, her face deathly pale. Hong stood beside her, gripping her phone tight, her eyes filled with fear and hatred. I pressed the phone to my ear and told Kwan, "Prepare the files for me. This is no longer just a family matter." Then I shut the car door, held Thou in my arms, and let the car speed toward the hospital through the night. The hospital at nearly 2 a.m. was emptier than during the day, but the cold white lights in the ER made everything feel even more intense. I carried Thou inside, calling for a nurse as I walked. Her body went limp in my arms, her head resting against my chest, her breathing erratic. I had never seen my wife look so weak, the woman who usually just grits her teeth through any pain to say, "I'm fine." At that moment, she only had the strength to clutch my shirt, as if afraid that letting go would drag her back into that storage room. Dr. Truck quickly took Thou into the examination room. I stood by, answering every question with a throat tight and choked up. The doctor checked her blood pressure, heart rate, and blood sugar, then looked at the bruises on her wrists, shoulders, and arms. They were all dark purple, not from some minor bump. Thou's hands were scraped, and one of her fingernails was broken, perhaps because she had been pounding on the door for so long in desperation. The doctor frowned, his voice dropping. "She is dehydrated and has significantly low blood sugar. These bruises are from being grabbed or subjected to strong impact. Was she held in a confined space for several days?" The question fell softly, but to me, it felt like a stab of a knife. I looked over at Thou, lying on the hospital bed, her lips cracked, eyes shut tight, yet tears still streamed from the corners. I wanted to answer for her, to shout out that my wife was locked up by my own mother and sister-in-law. But in that moment, my throat was so constricted that I couldn't utter a word. Thou was put on an IV, given stomach protective medicine, and the doctor advised monitoring her for exhaustion and severe stress. When the nurse pulled the curtain, the metal ring sliding on the rod made a faint metallic sound. Yet Thou jumped, her eyes flying open in terror, her hands instinctively pulling back to her chest. I quickly grabbed her hand, whispering, "It's okay, it's me, no one is locking any doors." "You are at the hospital." Thou stared at me for a long time, as if it took her a few seconds to realize she had escaped that room. Then she burst into tears, not a violent cry, but the choked sobs of someone holding back for too long. I pulled a chair close to the bed, holding her hand with both of mine. "Can you tell me everything from the beginning? Take it slowly, tell me what you remember, and leave what is too exhausting for later. But I need to know what they did to you." Thou nodded very slightly. Her voice was raspy, she had to stop many times to catch her breath. She recounted how my mother and Hong forced her to sign a paper to hand over the savings book, how Hong snatched her phone, my mother slapped her, and then they dragged her to the storage room. She said that while locked inside, she pounded on the door until her hands were raw, while outside, they were still eating and watching TV as if nothing had happened. When she got to the part where Hong threw cold rice inside, Thou bit her lip for a long time before she could continue. I wasn't as afraid of the hunger as I was of hearing them laugh. They stood outside laughing, as if I weren't even human. I bowed my head and gritted my teeth. That sentence made my heart ache to the point of suffocation. I asked, "Did you hear them say anything about money?" Thou wiped her tears, trying to remember. "Yes, Hong said if there's no money this week, they'll come to the house. Mom said they had to force me to give up the book before you returned. That's all I heard. I don't know what kind of debt it was." She looked at me, her eyes still filled with panic. "I didn't sign, I was so scared, but I didn't sign. That money belongs to both of us." I squeezed her hand, feeling as if someone was strangling my heart. "I know you didn't do anything wrong, not even a little bit." After saying that, I realized I was trembling. Not from the cold, but from a mix of anger and self-reproach. If I had paid closer attention, if I had noticed the strange signs earlier, perhaps Thou wouldn't have had to suffer like this. Around 3 a.m., Quan arrived at the hospital. He had hastily thrown on a jacket, carrying a laptop and a small hard drive. As soon as he saw Thou lying in the hospital bed, his expression darkened immediately. Quan didn't ask much, just pulled me out into the hallway and opened his laptop on a bench. He spoke quietly, "I managed to download the data from the secondary camera you gave me access to. The main hallway camera was covered and lost connection, but the secondary camera saved a few clips before it was cut." The screen displayed the backyard of my house at dusk. The angle was a bit far, but it was enough to see Hong dragging a long iron bar to place across the storage door. Then she leaned down to check the lock, while my mother stood beside her, looking around as if afraid of being discovered. Watching that scene, my hands turned icy cold. No further explanation was needed. That image was enough to show they knew exactly what they were doing. Then Quan opened another audio file. It was a recording from an old phone in the storage room that Thou accidentally charged. The sound was crackly, sometimes mixed with thuds and Thou's breathing. But one sentence from Hong rang out, terrifyingly clear. Lock her up another night, tomorrow she'll soften up and sign. I got goosebumps. Quan paused the audio and looked at me. Dad, this is key evidence, not a spontaneous argument. It was meant to force a signature. I turned my head to look through the hospital room window. Thou was lying on her side, an IV still in her arm, her face heartbreakingly tired. I walked in, sat down next to her, and didn't know what to say except one thing from the bottom of my heart. I was wrong. I was wrong for leaving you alone in that house. Thou shook her head. Tears welled up again. I just wanted you to believe me. I was afraid they'd say I was making it up. I leaned down and kissed the back of her scratched hand lightly. I believe you. From now on, I will stand in front, and I won't let you have to prove your pain alone anymore. That sentence didn't make Thou's wounds disappear, but I felt her hand stop trembling a little. Quan then pulled me outside to talk privately. He advised me not to rush home in a fit of rage and confront them immediately. The angrier you are, the more excuse they have to say you're being provoked by your wife. To handle this once and for all, we must let them expose themselves more. Now that Thou is safe, the task is to secure evidence, get the documents, check our room, and see what they prepared to force a signature. I was silent for a moment, then nodded. I understood that Quan was right. If I only acted on anger, I could ruin everything. Before leaving the hospital, I told the nurse and ward security not to let any of my family members have private contact with Thou if I wasn't there. I also asked Quan to stay for a while longer, just in case my mother or Hong showed up to put on pressure, but the shock didn't end there. Quan just checked some data from the phone numbers Hong provided in the loan documents and discovered she had borrowed from many credit apps, using relatives' numbers as emergency contacts. Thou's number was on that list. I stared at the familiar string of digits on the screen, and my whole body went cold. Thou never signed, never agreed, and didn't even know she had been linked to those loans. That was when I realized this wasn't just a simple case of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict or a family outburst. My wife might have been turned into a name to carry debt, a shield for Hong's mistakes. And if I hadn't returned in time that night, who knows what else they planned to force Thou to sign. The next morning, once Thou was stable and under doctor's observation, I returned home alone. Quan warned me very carefully before I left. Absolutely do not lose your temper. To know what they are hiding, you must let them think you still want to keep this within the family. I heard him, and just nodded. Inside, I felt like I was burning up. But I understood that if I entered the house looking for a fight, my mother and Hong would surely clam up, deny everything, or invent another story to blame Thou. The house gate was still left ajar like last night. I stepped into the yard and looked toward the storage room. The broken lock still lay on the ground. The iron bar used to wedge the door was leaned against the wall. The door stood slightly open, and the smell of mold still lingered inside. Just a few hours ago, Thou was still locked in there. I paused for a beat, clenched my fists, then forced myself to turn away. I was not allowed to let my emotions override my reason. In the living room, my mother and Hong were already seated, with a hot teapot and a few cups neatly arranged on the table. It was as if they were waiting for a perfectly normal family chat. My mother's eyes were a bit swollen, but her face still tried to maintain a stern look. Hong sat close by, clutching her chest. Her face was pale, like someone who had been wronged all night long. As soon as she saw me walk in, she lowered her eyes and let out a very soft sigh, acting the part of someone suffering. My mother spoke first. Her voice was softer than last night, but every word still carried the intent to shift the blame. Dad, I know you're angry, but I only wanted to teach her some manners. Who would have thought she was so weak, making such a scene over a small matter? I looked at my mother, feeling a chill in my heart. A person locked in a storage room, starved, dehydrated, with bruised arms. Yet in her eyes, it was still just too weak. Hong immediately chimed in, her voice choking as if she were about to cry. Don't just listen to Thou's side of the story. She's very good at playing the victim. Yesterday, we just wanted her to calm down. Who knew she would overreact like that? You know how she is. She looks gentle on the outside, but she's stubborn on the inside. I silently pulled out a chair and sat down. If it were me a few hours ago, I probably would have slammed the table and stood up. But now, I just looked at both of them and asked slowly, so, where is the paper you made Thou sign? Both of them froze, just for a brief moment. But I saw it clearly. My mother turned to Hong. Hong blinked and gave a forced smile. What paper, sir? It was just a commitment to behave properly in the house. Mother is old. She just wanted thou to write a few lines so she wouldn't be disrespectful to her again. I pretended to sigh, rubbing my forehead like someone exhausted by family affairs. If it's just a commitment paper, let me see it. I'll take it to the hospital to talk to thou. If we can resolve this peacefully, I don't want to make a big deal out of it either. That sentence worked immediately. My mother thought I had softened up. She turned to Hong, go get it for him to see. Family matters need someone to step up and settle them. Hong hesitated, her eyes darting toward me, trying to see if I was setting a trap, but seeing me sit calmly without a harsh tone, she got up and went upstairs. While Hong went to get the paper, my mother lowered her voice, Dad, you're a man, you have to look at the big picture. You love your wife, but you have to discipline her. She keeps her own money and listens to her own family about everything. You'll suffer later. I looked at my mother for a long time. The woman in front of me is my mother, the person who stayed up all night when I had a fever as a child, who sold her wedding gold so my siblings and I could go to school. But that same person locked my wife in the storage room. The pain of that feeling is so deep I don't know what to call it. Hong returned with a stack of papers clipped in a blue plastic folder. She placed it on the table but kept her hand on top, smiling awkwardly. Just look if you want, don't read too much into it. We're all family. I pulled the papers toward me and opened them. After just a glance at the first few lines, I felt my blood turn cold. It wasn't a behavior agreement, it was a power of attorney authorizing withdrawals from thou's savings account. Attached was a pre-written agreement stating that thou voluntarily lent Hong money interest-free, with no specific repayment date. At the bottom, the space for a signature and thumbprint was left blank. Every line was prepared so neatly, it clearly wasn't written in a moment of anger. They had planned this in advance. I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked, why is Hong's name on this? Hong brushed her hair and gave a faint smile. It's just family helping each other. Why are you so tense? I'm in a temporary bind and borrowed a little from my sister-in-law. I'll pay it back. It's not like I'm keeping it forever. I looked at her. If you're just borrowing, why lock someone in a storage room? Hong turned pale but remained stubborn. Who locked anyone up? I just did that to help her calm down. I didn't argue. I continued, asking each word clearly. How much do you owe? The atmosphere in the living room immediately grew heavy. Hong pursed her lips, and before she could answer, my mother slammed her hand on the table. Is that how you talk to your sister-in-law? When there's family trouble, a daughter-in-law should contribute. She has money, yet sees her in-laws struggling and won't help. Is that acceptable? I lowered my head slightly and used my finger to turn on the recording mode in my pocket. Then I looked up at my mother like a child, still hoping to hear the truth from her. So, you knew Hong was in debt? My mother was too angry to hold her tongue anymore. She blurted out, so what if I knew? If we don't take thou's money, should we let people come and seize our house? Do you want to watch your sister-in-law die? Hong immediately turned ghostly pale and hurriedly pulled my mother's arm. Mom, what are you saying? But it was too late. That statement was already tucked away in my phone. I looked at the two people before me, one my own mother and the other my sister-in-law, feeling nothing but a chilling coldness in my heart. I stood up, placed the papers on the table, and said slowly, so, you two didn't lock my wife up to teach her manners. You locked her up to steal money to pay off your debts. My mother went silent, stunned. Hong immediately changed her expression, her eyes sharpening as she pointed right at me. Watch your mouth, don't slander us without proof. You're blinded by defending your wife. I looked at her without answering. Because by then I understood, with people capable of locking thou away for 3 days, these few lies were just the beginning. I folded the papers, held them in my hand, and turned to leave the living room. At that moment, I only wanted to return to the hospital to be with thou as quickly as possible. I already knew what I needed to know, and the phone in my pocket had captured everything that needed to be recorded. But Hong was clearly not the type of person to let things end in silence. She understood that if she let me leave with those papers, she would lose the upper hand. I had just stepped out into the yard when a loud wail suddenly erupted behind me. It wasn't the kind of crying choked with grief, but a deliberately prolonged wailing, intended for the neighbors to hear. Hong rushed out after me, her hair slightly messy, clutching her chest with both hands, sobbing and shouting, "Oh my God, everyone come out and see this. I only tried to advise my sister-in-law to live properly, yet she accuses me of harming her. Now she's even incited her husband to come back and turn the whole house upside down." I froze in my tracks. My mother, as if catching the cue, also stepped out into the yard, one hand clutching her chest and the other leaning on the porch pillar. She said in a trembling voice, "I am old. I only want my children and grandchildren to have peace. Yet my daughter-in-law makes up stories, inciting her husband to turn against his own mother. I must be truly cursed to face this situation." The two of them coordinated so perfectly that I felt a chill run down my spine just watching them. Only a few minutes ago, they had blurted out that they wanted Thou's money to pay off their debts. Yet, the moment they stepped out into the yard, they immediately transformed themselves into the victims. Hong's crying caused a few doors to creak open. A neighbor from across the street peeked out, followed by two others walking over from the end of the alley. In these tightly packed neighborhoods, a single shout is enough for the whole area to know something is up. The more Hong noticed people watching, the louder she wailed. She pointed a finger at me, her voice dripping with fake indignation. Dad is being led around by the nose by his wife. She makes herself miserable and blames everything on Mom and me. I'm just the sister-in-law, yet a few words of advice and I'm the villain. My mother chimed in to support her. Ever since she married into this family, we've had no peace. Mom says one word and she calls her husband to defend her. Now she's even making up stories about being locked up and forced to sign things. No one in this house is eating her alive, yet she acts like she's being tortured. I stood in the courtyard, still holding the stack of papers, listening to every word and feeling like I was watching a clumsy but cruel play. The scariest part isn't that they lie, but that they lie so quickly and naturally, as if they're used to turning black into white. Before I could even speak, Hong pulled out her phone and shoved the screen toward the neighbors. "Everyone, look at this. This is the text message she sent me yesterday. She said she wanted to run away and give the whole family a scare. Now she turns around and blames it on us." I glanced at the screen, which showed a message thread saved under Thou's name. The content was roughly that she was tired of her in-laws, wanted to hide in the storage room to scare everyone, and would then force me to give her money to move out. Just by looking at the first two sentences, I knew immediately it was fake. Thou never texts that bluntly, and she would never use phrases like, "make the whole family pay," or, "take all of Dad's money." That tone sounded more like Hong than Thou, but I also understood that outsiders wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Hong knew that well, which is why she dared to put on this act right in the courtyard. She raised her voice, claiming Thou locked herself in just to blame Mom and me. Her goal is to have Dad put all the money in her name, just as she wants. She doesn't have children yet, so she's always afraid of being shortchanged later on, afraid that her husband's family will take her share. That statement made my face darken instantly. Even at this point, Hong didn't forget to twist the knife regarding Thou's inability to have children. My mother covered her face and wept. "I'm old, and I'm being harmed by my daughter-in-law. Whatever I say is only for the good of my children and grandchildren." A few neighbors started whispering. Some looked at me, some at Hong, not knowing whom to believe. I still didn't rush to refute her. I had learned one thing from Quan. When a liar is on a roll, just let them keep talking. Often, their own mouth will push them into a pit. And right at that moment, the sound of a motorcycle braking sharply echoed from the end of the alley. Three men walked in, disheveled and looking thuggish. The one in front had a fully tattooed forearm, a toothpick in his mouth, his eyes scanning the yard before resting on Hong. He gave a cold laugh. "Sister Hong, what's with the crying? Do you have the money to pay yet, or are you just here performing?" Quote, the atmosphere in the yard instantly froze. Hong turned visibly pale. The look of being wronged vanished in the blink of an eye. She took half a step back, her mouth stammering. You have the wrong person. I don't know you." The man laughed, a hoarse, unpleasant sound. "Don't know us? If you don't know us, how did you borrow $380 million from us?" Quote, "Don't know us? Did you send photos of your brother-in-law's house deeds as collateral then?" Quote, I was stunned. My brother-in-law's house deeds. Those 4 words were like a thunderbolt striking the yard. The neighbors went dead silent, and every eye turned instantly toward Hong. My mother also turned sharply to look at her, her lips trembling. "Hong, what is he saying?" Hong was so panicked she even forgot the act she was playing. She hurriedly waved her hand at the group, her voice low but still audible to those standing nearby. "I already told you I'd have the money in a few days. Why did you come here?" That sentence tore apart her entire victim act with her own hands. A few seconds ago, Hong claimed she didn't know them. A few seconds later, she admitted she was arranging to pay them back. The tattooed man took a step into the yard, his voice dropping. "Which day is a few days? You said your sister-in-law was about to sign the papers and that the savings book would be released. Now that she isn't signing, what do you plan to do?" I looked at Hong, a chill running down my spine. It turns out it wasn't just the savings book. Hong secretly took photos of our house deed to use as collateral for a high-interest loan. and thou being locked up and forced to sign was just the final piece of the puzzle for her to fill the hole she dug herself. My mother tremblingly pulled Hong back into the house, but one of the three men blocked the steps. "Where are you going? If there's no money today, we're going to have a clear conversation. Who in this house is the guarantor?" Hong looked around, her panicked eyes searching for something to cling to. My mother's face went completely pale. The neighbors started whispering again. This time, it wasn't just suspicion, it was shock and outrage. I slowly held up the stack of papers in my hand and looked straight at Hong. "You intended to use thou's money to pay your debt, use my house papers as collateral, and fake text messages to frame my wife. How much longer do you plan on acting?" Hong opened her mouth but couldn't speak. For the first time since I returned, she was truly speechless. Standing in the yard full of the neighbors' gazes, I finally understood why they had to hurry and lock thou up before I got back. It wasn't just about the 60 million Hong cried about, or just a savings book. Behind it was a massive debt, a dirty trap, and a plot to make my wife the scapegoat for her own greed. I didn't answer Hong right away. In situations like these, if you lose your cool for even a second, everything will immediately head in the wrong direction. The debt collectors were standing in the yard, and the neighbors were gathering in larger numbers. My mother's face was ashen, while Hong was both terrified and trying to maintain an aggressive front. I knew if I let them keep bickering, a physical altercation would easily break out, and when things escalate into a brawl, the person who suffers most in the end is still thou. I took out my phone and called Quan immediately. He picked up the moment it rang. I said briefly, "Quan, come to my house right now. Bring the entire file, including the camera footage and the documents you extracted. Everything has come to light." Quan only replied, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. You secure the scene, don't let anyone into the house, and don't let anyone touch the papers." I hung up the phone and turned to the three debt collectors. The tattooed man was still blocking the entrance, looking ready to barge right into the house. I raised my hand to stop them, my voice firm, "Stay in the yard. Whoever borrowed the money should pay it back." Quote, "No one is allowed to barge into this house, and no one is allowed to use my wife as a shield anymore." He looked me up and down with a cold laugh. "You talk a good game, but who's going to pay us back?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Who signed for it? Whoever took the money should pay it back. If you want your money, go about it the right way. If you cause trouble here, I'm calling the police immediately." Hearing that, Hong shrieked, "You're my brother-in-law, aren't you going to save me? I only borrowed because I was in a tough spot. Do you have to be so heartless?" I turned to look at my sister-in-law, a woman who just made up stories to frame my wife, who was just exposed by her creditors in front of the whole neighborhood, still had the audacity to talk about being heartless. I replied with every word clear, "Saving you doesn't mean letting you slowly kill my wife. Your debts are your own business, but locking thou up for 3 days to force her to sign papers, I will not let that slide." That statement made the courtyard fall silent for a moment. The neighbors looked at each other, their expressions beginning to change. Earlier, some were still hesitant because Hong's crying seemed so real. My mother also feigned weakness, looking quite pitiful. But upon hearing about locking someone up for 3 days and using my wife to pay off debts, that vague sympathy slowly turned into outrage. My mother suddenly lunged forward. She raised her hand and slapped me right in front of everyone. The sound of the slap rang out sharply. My cheek burned, but I didn't flinch or react. Mrs. Kian scolded with a trembling voice, "You unfilial wretch, would you humiliate your own mother before the whole village just for a woman?" I looked at my mother. The pain on my face was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I said slowly, "You can hit me, mother, I am your son, I will take it. But you locked my wife in the shed for 3 days, forcing her to sign papers to pay off Hong's debts. That, I cannot take on your behalf." An elderly neighbor standing near the gate sighed softly. "Mrs. Kian, hitting your son in the middle of the yard like this is just not right. So if the daughter-in-law is locked up, who is she supposed to call?" That statement was like a stone thrown at a tense, snarling tiger. My mother froze, while Hong glared at her but didn't dare to argue back. At that exact moment, Quan arrived, accompanied by a young assistant carrying a laptop and a thick file folder. As soon as he stepped into the yard, he surveyed the scene quickly and placed his laptop on the stone table on the porch. Quan didn't raise his voice, but his tone was clear enough for everyone standing nearby to hear. "I am the legal representative for Dad and Thou. Before anyone continues to claim this is a family matter, I would like to present some evidence so everyone understands the situation." Hong immediately shouted, Who gave you permission to open that? This is my house. Kwon looked at her calmly. You just stood in the middle of the yard accusing others of slander, so evidence is the fairest way to clarify things. Saying that, he opened the surveillance footage. The screen showed Hong pulling the iron bar to wedge the storage room door shut. Although the angle was a bit distant, her figure, clothing, and actions were very clear. The crowd erupted immediately, and Hong's face turned pale as her lips trembled. That was just because I was afraid she would run out and cause trouble. Kwon didn't argue, he simply played the audio clip. Amidst the static, my mother's voice rang out clearly. Only this way can we teach a daughter-in-law a lesson. Right after that was Hong's voice. Once she signs tomorrow, we'll have money to pay off the debt. The atmosphere in the yard seemed to freeze. My mother took half a step back, her hand gripping the porch pillar. Hong stood rooted to the spot, staring at the screen as if she couldn't believe the things she had said were recorded so clearly. Kwon continued by pulling a copy of the loan document from the file, which featured photos of my family's house deeds, copies of Hong's ID, and lines committing to debt repayment. He stated clearly that using others' property documents to take out loans without consent and then forcing the victims to sign papers assuming financial liability shows clear signs of fraud and coercion. Furthermore, locking Thou in the storage room for days, regardless of the excuse, cannot be considered a family disciplinary matter. Ms. Kian stammered, I just care for my eldest daughter-in-law. She said she was desperate. I didn't think it was this serious. I turned to my mother, speaking very softly, but every word felt heavy as stone. You love her, so you sacrificed my wife. Did you ever think about how hungry, thirsty, and terrified Thou was in there? She lowered her head, unable to answer. Seeing there was no way to deny it, Hong suddenly turned to blame my mother. It was you who said to just lock her up. I told you to take it slow, but you kept pushing to be harsh. Now you figure it out. That sentence left my mother stunned. The eldest daughter-in-law she had tried so hard to protect, the person she was willing to harm Thou for out of affection. At the moment of danger, she pushed all the responsibility onto her. I watched the scene without feeling satisfied, only feeling bitter. In the end, when the truth came out, what they called family, which they used to pressure Thou, shattered with just one sentence of blame. I took my phone and dialed the local police station right in front of everyone. When the other end picked up, I said clearly, my name is Dad. I want to report that my wife was locked in the storage room for 3 days, forced to sign financial documents, and our house deeds were used for illegal debt. The people involved and the evidence are all here at my house now. Quote. After speaking, I looked at my mother and then at Hong. For the first time since this all started, neither of them dared to raise their voices. On their faces was only a stunned look, as if they had just realized the door they thought they locked to trap Thou had finally closed off their own escape. About 15 minutes after my call, 2 local police officers arrived at the gate. As they walked in, the crowd automatically parted to both sides. The person filming with their phone also lowered it a bit. The murmuring quieted down. My yard was so chaotic at that moment it looked like a small neighborhood trial. On one side was my mother, deathly pale, and Hong, her lips trembling but still trying to look aggrieved. On the other side was me, Kwon, the stacks of papers, and 3 debt collectors standing back by the gate. An officer looked around and asked, "Who is the one who made the report?" I took a step forward, my voice much calmer now. I said, "It was me. My name is Dad. My wife, Thou, is currently in the hospital. She was locked in the shed behind our house for 3 days and forced to sign a power of attorney to withdraw our savings. Furthermore, our house deed was photographed to take out a loan without our consent." Hong immediately burst into tears. She started crying so quickly, it was as if she were just waiting for that cue to continue her performance. "Officers, I was only borrowing it temporarily. My family is struggling. I was desperate. I only asked to borrow some money from my sister-in-law. I didn't kill anyone. Why make such a big deal out of this? We are family. Dad, how could you bear to push your sister-in-law into a corner?" She wiped her tears while speaking, but her eyes glanced quickly toward my mother, as if checking to see if she would chime in. I turned to look at Hong. The explosive rage I felt earlier had passed. Now, it was cold, sharp, and much clearer. I said slowly, "You locked my wife away for 3 days. How much worse does it need to get? Do you wait until she faints in the shed, or until you forced her to sign that paper?" Quote. Hong was left speechless, her sobbing cut short, sounding pathetically fake. Kwon stepped forward and placed the file in front of the officer. He didn't ramble, simply presenting each item one by one. First was the security camera footage showing Hong sliding the iron bar to lock the shed door. Next was the audio recording that included my mother's words. "This is the only way to teach a daughter-in-law a lesson." Then came Hong's voice saying, "Sign it, and there will be money to pay off the debt." Finally, there were the copies of the loan documents, photos of our house deed and the unsigned power of attorney for the savings account. The officer examined them very carefully. The other one was taking notes continuously. Every time Kwon revealed a new piece of evidence, Hong's face grew a little paler. Miss Kian stood leaning against the porch pillar, her hands clenched together, unable to say another word. Seeing the police checking the files, the debt collectors began looking at one another. The tattooed man from earlier gradually backed toward the gate, as if intending to slip away while no one was paying attention. Kwon immediately turned to the officer and requested that they detain this group for initial questioning. They are the recipients of the documents, and they just confirmed here that Hong promised to take money from Thou's savings book to pay off her debt. The tattooed man frowned. "We just came to collect money, we didn't do anything." The police officer looked at him, his voice hardening. "Since you are involved in a case regarding property documents and lending, I suggest you stay to clarify the matter." With no other choice, the man had to stay. At first, he was evasive, saying he only knew about the loan and nothing about the family issues. But when Kwon repeated what he had just said in front of the neighbors, he irritably confessed. "Hong said the mother-in-law in the house already agreed to it. She said if we could just force the sister-in-law to sign the papers, we would have the money. We didn't know if they were locking anyone up or not. She even sent photos of house deeds, saying it was a relative's house that could be used." As soon as that statement ended, the whole yard seemed to freeze. My mother collapsed into a nearby plastic chair, her face drained of all color. She muttered, her voice trembling so much it was barely audible. "I thought I would just scare her into signing it. I thought if she stayed in there for a while, she would get scared." I looked at my mother. That woman is my mother, but she is also the one who stood outside the storage room door listening to Thou plead. My heart truly ached, aching to the point of suffocation, but I could not let that pain turn into a cover-up. I stepped in front of her and said very softly, "Mother, scaring someone to the point of exhaustion is also a crime. You're not innocent just because you didn't hold a knife. You locked the door, you kept silent. You left Thou in there for 3 days. Did you think she was made of iron?" Mrs. Kian looked up at me, her lips trembling, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks, but for the first time, she could not argue back. The police officer, after consulting with his colleague, turned to Hong and invited her to the ward station for questioning. There are signs of coercion involving forcing others to sign documents, using property documents without consent, and fraudulent lending. Specific details will be further verified. Upon hearing that, Hong became truly panicked. She stepped back, waving her hands frantically. "No, I'm not going anywhere. I only borrowed money. I haven't done anything that's serious. It was all because Mom told me to play hard. Mom said to just lock her up. She'd sign once she got scared." Those words came out too fast, too clearly. The whole yard fell completely silent. As soon as Hong said it, she realized her mistake. Her face went pale as a sheet. Mrs. Kian snapped her head up to look at her, her eyes filled with both shock and pain. The eldest daughter-in-law she defended, shielded, and hurt Thou for. In the end, when danger struck, she turned around to drag her down too. What did you say?" my mother, Hong, asked in a trembling voice. Hong burst into tears. "Did I say something wrong? If you hadn't agreed, how could I have locked her up by myself? You wanted her money too, didn't you?" Quote, those words back and forth were like tearing down the final curtain with their own hands. I didn't need to add anything more. Everyone understood that Mrs. Kian wasn't completely deceived by Hong. She knew and she agreed. She just didn't expect the price to pay would come so soon. Mrs. Kian burst into tears. No more shouting, no more of that overbearing mother-in-law facade. She cried like someone who had just realized they had gone too far. But that realization came far too late. I was afraid she would get agitated and actually collapse. So despite my anger, I immediately took my phone and called my brother. Kai answered after a few rings, his voice still groggy with sleep. "What's going on?" I looked at Hong being told by the police to stand aside, looked at my mother slumped in her chair, and said, "Come home right now." Hong's debts, her use of my house papers, and locking Thou up, it's all been exposed. Less than 20 minutes later, Kai sped back to the gate, still in his work clothes, his face panicked. As soon as he stepped into the yard, he saw the police, the crowd, and Hong standing with her head bowed next to the files. The officer summarized the incident, every word making Kai's face turn paler. When he heard the part about my house papers being used by Hong to take out a loan, he stood frozen. He turned to look at his wife, his voice hoarse as if he had to struggle to force out a single sentence. Did you really use my brother's house to get a loan? Hong opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. As for me, I stood silently by, knowing the storm in this family was only just beginning. Kai stood in the middle of the yard, his hands hanging loose, staring at Hong as if she were a stranger. My brother is normally a man of few words, working all his life and coming home, always yielding to his wife to keep the peace. That was why, when hearing him ask, "Did you really use my brother's house as collateral for a loan?" the whole yard went completely silent. No one thought that gentle man could ever utter such a cold sentence. As soon as Hong saw her husband, it was like she had found a lifeline. She rushed over to cling to Kai's legs, tears and snot streaming down her face. "Honey, please save me. I only did it for the sake of our family. I didn't want you to suffer, didn't want our children to go without. I was desperate, that's why I made a mistake." She looked up at her husband, her voice trembling, yet her eyes still held that familiar calculating look. Perhaps Hong thought Kai was like my mother, that as long as she cried miserably enough and mentioned the family and the kids, everything would be forgiven. But this time, Kai didn't bend down to help her up. He stood still, lips pressed tight, his face turning pale bit by bit. A moment later, he asked in a raspy but clear voice, "For the family, or because you lost money gambling and took out high-interest loans behind my back?" That statement hit Hong like a slap to the face. She snapped her head up, eyes wide. What are you saying? Who told you that?" Kai gave a bitter smile, a smile that hurt more than it was angry. "No one had to tell me. For months, money has been disappearing, the kids' tuition was paid late, and the wedding gold in the safe is gone. When I asked, you said you sent it to your parents. I may be foolish, but I'm not blind." At that moment, I was also stunned. It turned out Kai wasn't completely in the dark. He had suspected it for a long time, just lacked the proof, or perhaps he was still trying to believe his wife hadn't gone too far. Hong turned pale, the look of grievance she wore just moments ago completely shattered. She stammered, I only played a few times for fun. Then I got dragged in, people pressured me, I was scared you'd find out, so Kai growled, afraid I'd find out, so you dragged both my mother and my sister-in-law into paying off your debts. Quan then opened another file folder. He produced a few bank statements extracted from the documents Hong left in her loan folder. On them were many small, recurring transfers to unknown accounts. Some had very vague descriptions. Some were transferred exactly on the days the debt collectors mentioned. Quan said calmly, "These transactions show signs of a chain interest payment scheme. The initial loan might not have been large, but because of compounding interest, it ballooned quickly." Kai held the statement, his hand shaking. He looked at Hong and asked a question he could barely get out without choking back tears. "How much do you owe in total?" Hong hung her head, not daring to answer. The tattooed man standing near the gate suddenly spoke up, his voice nonchalant. "As of this morning, it's 430 million, not counting today's late fees." As soon as that number was called out, my mother clutched her chest and stumbled. A neighbor standing nearby had to quickly help her sit down. Mrs. Kian looked at Hong, her lips trembling. "You told me it was only a little over 100 million. Hong burst into tears, but this time, her crying didn't make anyone feel sorry for her. "I was afraid you'd scold me, Mom. I intended to take thou's money to pay off part of it first and figure out the rest later. Who would have thought things would turn out like this?" My mother closed her eyes, tears streaming down. I looked at her, my voice dropping. "Do you see now, Mom? Your misplaced love nearly ruined the whole family. You thought saving Hong would keep the family together, but you pushed thou into the greatest danger." Kai suddenly raised his hand and slapped his own face hard. The sound of the slap startled everyone. Hong also froze. He didn't hit his wife, didn't curse, just stood there, eyes bloodshot, saying every word clearly. "I was a fool to trust you, but I'm not low enough to use my sister-in-law to pay my debts." That sentence made me choke up. In all that mess, Kai still maintained the last bit of decency of a man who knows right from wrong. He was hurt and humiliated, but he didn't lay a finger on his wife. He only blamed himself for letting things go this far. Hearing that, Hong lost control. She stood up abruptly, pointing her finger at everyone, her voice shrill, "You all think you're so great. Now everyone is turning their backs on me. If you don't save me, this whole family will lose face. Mom will lose face, Kai will lose face, and Uncle Dat won't look good either. Quote, a sister-in-law arrested for debt will make the whole clan a laughingstock. I looked at Hong, feeling not a shred of pity left. I said clearly, losing face can be mended, but losing one's humanity cannot. You can owe money, you can make mistakes, but you have no right to lock up thou, no right to use my wife as a scapegoat for your own wrongdoings. Hearing that, the police officer ordered Hong, the debt collectors, and those involved to head to the station to work. Hong panicked and grabbed Kai's hand again. Honey, please speak up for me, I'm your wife. Kai leaned down and pulled Hong's hand away, his voice weary. Because you are my wife, I won't falsely accuse you of anything more. But wherever you are wrong, you must tell the truth about it. Don't drag any more innocent people down with you. He signed the report confirming his cooperation. Then he turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. Quote, Dad, let me take Mom inside to rest for a moment. She's not doing well. I looked at Mom. She sat on the chair, her face deathly pale, clutching her chest, breathing heavily. No matter how angry I was, I couldn't just stand there and watch my mother collapse in front of the crowd. I nodded. Quote, take Mom inside, but remember, everything must be told truthfully. Don't let sympathy for Mom cause thou to suffer any further. Kai nodded, understood. Before being taken away, Hong suddenly turned to look at me. Her eyes no longer held triumph or feigned grievance, only resentment and fear. Just then, my phone lit up. Quan was video calling from the hospital to report that thou was more alert. On the screen, thou's pale face appeared. Hong saw thou on the screen, and her eyes froze for a second. Thou said nothing, just looked at her for a long time. A gaze without spite or tears, yet enough to make Hong look down. I held the phone close and said to thou, don't worry, everything is being cleared up now. Thou nodded slightly. As for Hong, she was led to the car, her steps unsteady. Behind her, my mother was being helped into the house by Kai, surrounded by the judgmental gazes of neighbors. It was the same yard where she had stood crying and spinning her lies. In just one morning, the mask of the clever sister-in-law, the sensible eldest daughter-in-law had crumbled, revealing someone who, for the sake of debt, was willing to cast her sister-in-law into darkness. After Hong was taken away for questioning, the yard finally became less noisy. The neighbors gradually dispersed, with only a few curious looks cast back through the gate. Kai helped my mother inside, while I stood in the yard for a few more seconds, looking at the storage room door still left ajar behind me. The musty smell from inside seemed to still cling to my throat. I didn't want to stay there any longer. The person I needed right now wasn't my mother, not my brother, and certainly not any belated excuses. The person I needed was thou. I returned to the hospital when it was already late afternoon. Through the glass window, pale sunlight shone onto the cold white corridor. Thou lay on the hospital bed, her complexion less pale but her eyes still tired and hollow. An IV needle was still inserted in her hand. As I pushed the door open, the latch clicked, and thou jumped in alarm. She spun around, her hand instinctively gripping the edge of the blanket, her eyes panicked as if she were facing that dark storage room door instead of a hospital room. I froze, my heart aching as if someone were squeezing it. I walked very slowly to the bedside, lowering my voice, it's just me, you're okay now. Thou looked at me for a moment before relaxing her grip. That small reaction made me realize her wounds weren't just the bruises on her wrists or cuts on her palms. They were etched into her mind, triggered by every tiny sound of a lock or the clinking of metal. I sat down by the bed and took her hand. Thou's hand was cold and noticeably thinner after just a few days. I hung my head for a long time before I could say, I'm sorry, I was too complacent. I thought Mom was just difficult and Sister Hong was selfish, but I never thought they could go that far. I left you among people who didn't love you, and then foolishly thought that making a few phone calls was enough. Thou looked at me, her eyes reddening, but she didn't blame me. She just said very softly, what I feared most wasn't being in the warehouse. What I feared most was when I called you and your phone was off. At that moment, I thought if you didn't answer, I might have actually had to sign it, and I might never have gotten out. Those words left me choked up. I didn't know how to respond adequately. For a husband, no matter how many work excuses he has, hearing his wife say that only leaves him with deep remorse. I squeezed her hand and said, from now on, there will be no more situations where you have to fend for yourself in my own house. I promise. Thou didn't answer, just gave a slight nod. But I knew a promise wasn't enough right now. Thou needed to be truly safe, needed to be truly respected. And the first thing I had to do was set the boundaries that I should have set long ago. About an hour later, Brother Kai called me. His voice was weary. Dad, Mom wants to come to the hospital to see thou. I know it's not a good time, but she keeps crying, and her blood pressure is rising. I'm not asking you to forgive her, just let her offer an apology in front of you both. I silently looked over at thou. She had heard part of the conversation, her eyes cast downward. I asked softly, do you want to see Mom? If you don't want to, I will refuse immediately. Thou was silent for a long time. She said, let her come in, but stay by my side. I nodded. I will be here, and Brother Kai will be here too. Mom will not speak to you alone. I didn't want to put thou in a position where she had to endure my mother alone ever again. When Mrs. Kian walked in, I almost didn't recognize my mother of ordinary days. She no longer had that rigid demeanor, nor that judgmental gaze. She walked slowly, leaning on Brother Kai. Her face was haggard, looking as if she had aged a decade in just one morning. Seeing thou lying in the hospital bed, her lips trembled. She stood a few steps from the bed, not daring to approach immediately. I was wrong, thou. Her voice was hoarse, just one sentence, but for someone like my mother, it was perhaps heavier than any other word. Thou looked at her in silence for a long time. The hospital room was so quiet you could hear the IV drip. Finally, thou spoke, her voice weak but clear. I don't need you to love me like your own child, nor do I need you to defend me before others. I only need you to remember that I am also a human being. I feel pain, I feel fear, and I feel hurt. I am not an object for you to lock up and call it discipline. Mrs. Kian burst into tears. She reached out as if to take thou's hand, but thou gently pulled it back. Not harshly, not spitefully, just a very clear rejection. My mother froze, her hand hovering in the air before slowly dropping back down. Watching that, I felt both pain and clarity. Some hands, if reached out too late, can no longer be trusted enough to hold back. I stood up and said to my mother, I am still your son, that will not change. But from today on, I must be thou's husband first. I cannot let my wife continue to live in a place where she cried for help and no one opened the door. My mother lowered her head, tears falling silently. She didn't argue, didn't make excuses about her age, and didn't mention filial piety like before. I continued, my voice slow but firm. My wife and I will move out as soon as thou is discharged. You must write a truthful statement, not blaming thou, not saying she locked herself in, and not saying she made it all up. If you cooperate, I will present your sincere attitude within the limits of the law, but I will not cover for you. Kai, standing nearby, also spoke up, Mom, I will take you back to the countryside for a while. You need to get away from this and reflect. I will take care of you. But you must tell the truth. Mrs. Kian wiped her tears and nodded very slightly. That nod could not erase her mistakes, but at least it was the first sign that she had stopped making excuses. Thou lay on the bed, looking at my mother and said, I don't want you to face the harshest punishment if you truly realize your mistake. But as for Hong, I will keep the charges, because she didn't just harm me once, she planned this all along. I looked at my wife, a strange feeling of affection swelling in my heart. That woman had just escaped the darkness, yet she was clear-headed enough to distinguish between someone misguided who was dragged into this and a cruel mastermind. As my mother left the hospital room, she turned to look at thou one more time, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. Perhaps she understood that an apology right now does not entitle one to immediate forgiveness. The door closed very gently. Thou flinched slightly, but this time she wasn't as panicked as before. I held her hand, and she squeezed back very softly. In that moment, I understood that thou was not weak at all. She had only chosen to endure because she wanted to keep the family together for me, but now, she chooses kindness without losing her self-respect. And after everything, I finally learned that protecting the one you love is not about saying a few defensive words over dinner, but daring to set boundaries at the right time, even if that boundary lies between yourself and your own mother. That afternoon while I was still at the hospital with thou, Quan called to say the police needed to work more with Hong and the loan group. His tone was very brief. There was new data. This time, it would be hard for Hong to deny it. I looked over at thou. She was sitting back against the pillows, her complexion still pale, but her eyes were brighter. I didn't want her to hear any more heavy matters, but thou seemed to understand and said softly, "You go ahead, I have the nurses here, but please don't lose your temper." That advice made me pause. The one who was locked away for 3 days was her. The one who was hurt was also her. Yet she was still afraid that I might ruin things out of anger. I nodded, pulled the blanket up for my wife, and said, "I won't be hot-headed. I'm just going so that everything is cleared up until the end." Before leaving the room, I heard thou speak very softly behind my back. "I don't need anyone to take revenge for me. I just need to make sure that from now on, no one dares to do that to me again." That sentence followed me all the way to the police station. When I arrived, Hong was sitting in the office, looking haggard but still trying to maintain a tone of grievance. She kept repeating that she only wanted to scare her sister-in-law a little, that she didn't think thou was so weak, and that the whole thing was just a family matter I had blown out of proportion. I stood outside the door listening, my heart turning cold. Even now, Hong still feels no remorse for harming others. She only regrets that she was caught red-handed. An officer placed a phone recovered from the loan sharks on the table, which contained many message exchanges between Hong and a tattooed man. At first, Hong argued that those messages were doctored, but as the officer read them aloud, her voice faded. One part Hong wrote, "Her savings account still has over 200 million. She just needs to sign it, and there's money to pay up front." Another part read, "Her husband is away on a business trip, my family can handle it." And then came the message that made the whole room fall silent. "If she doesn't sign, lock her up longer. Her husband isn't back from his business trip yet." I heard that sentence, and my hands clenched until they went numb. It was no longer speculation, no longer just thou's account. Hong herself had written out her plot clearly, coldly, and cruelly. She took advantage of my absence, my mother's reluctance to offend, and thou's gentle nature to set up a trap. I looked at Hong through the glass window. The woman who once stood in the yard crying and pleading her innocence was now hanging her head, her shoulders shaking, though it was unclear if from fear or shame. The police also discovered photos of our house documents on Hong's phone. The photos were quite clear, with each page sent to the lenders along with a message. "This house belongs to my brother-in-law. All family members here. It can be turned over." When the officer asked who gave her permission to photograph and send those documents, Hong stammered for a long time before saying, I just took them for security. I thought as long as it gets paid, it's fine." Quan, sitting next to me, immediately said, "It is exactly that, it's fine, mindset that puts others in danger." Seeing she couldn't deny the documents, Hong immediately shifted to dragging my mother down with her. She testified that Ms. Kian knew about locking the door and forcing thou to sign, but didn't know she had used photos of the house documents to take out loans. That testimony both increased Hong's responsibility and made it impossible for my mother to be absolved. Ms. Kian was determined to be involved in detaining the person and forcing the signature, while Hong was the one who initiated the debt, prepared the documents, and pushed to keep thou locked up to the end. Kai was also present. He sat in the corner of the room, his face gaunt, looking like he had aged several years. When he heard Hong testifying evasively, he didn't utter a single word to defend her anymore. He only submitted the divorce papers he had hastily written that afternoon, along with a commitment to cooperate in resolving the legal debts within his ability, but refused to shoulder illegal interest or loans created by Hong through fraud. He told the officers, his voice hoarse, "I was wrong to let my wife hide this for so long, but I will not let my sister-in-law be dragged into paying for it." Hearing that, Hong suddenly turned to the lending group, screaming like a lunatic. "You guys promised not to snitch on me. You said as long as I paid, you would keep it quiet." The tattooed man sitting opposite gave a cold laugh, no longer appearing as threatening as he did outside, showing only the shamelessness of someone saving himself. "If you could sell out your sister-in-law, what's wrong with us selling you out?" That statement left Hong stunned. It was vicious but also true in the most ruthless way. Those who use others as sacrifices eventually get betrayed by the very people they conspired with. My mother was brought in by Kai afterward to give additional testimony. Upon hearing the officer read the messages Hong sent to the lenders, she collapsed into her chair. She no longer cried out loud, only muttered to herself, "I was so foolish, I've ruined my daughter-in-law." I looked at my mother with a heavy heart. I felt no satisfaction in her breakdown. After all, she is still my mother, but loving her does not mean I have the right to erase thou's pain. I turned to Kai and whispered, "Take Mom to get checked out, she looks so pale." Kai nodded, his eyes red. He helped Mother up. Before leaving, my mother looked at me as if she wanted to say something, but then lowered her head. Perhaps for the first time, she realized an apology now was far too small for what she had caused. With Hong, I had nothing left to negotiate. She was still only afraid of the charges, of losing face, and of losing her family, never once genuinely asking if Thao was in pain or if she was scared. Quan finished the legal documents to protect Thao's rights, requesting a clarification and invalidation of all loan papers that used images of our property deeds illegally. He also reminded me to have Thao undergo psychological monitoring, as those held in enclosed spaces are very prone to long-term trauma. Hearing that, my heart tightened. The bruises will fade, but the fear of the sound of a door locking may remain for a very long time. That evening, I called the office to request a leave of absence. I clearly stated there was a serious family matter. I needed to be by my wife's side. My manager was silent for a few seconds before saying, "The work here will be handled by the team. You take care of your wife first." For the first time in many days, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. Not because everything was over, but because I knew from now on, Thao would not be alone. Late at night, Hong was detained for further investigation. That news did not make me happy. It just made me realize one thing even more deeply. You reap what you sow, you harvest what you plant. As for my mother, for the first time after everything, she called me. On the other end of the line was her hoarse, weak voice. Quote, "I'm not asking you to save me, I'm asking you to take good care of Thao." I was silent for a long time, then replied, "I will take care of her." That is something I should have done much better a long time ago. A few weeks later, Thao's health became more stable. The bruises on her wrists had faded, her lips were no longer cracked, and her steps were steadier than before, but there are wounds that do not lie on the skin. Thao still cannot return to our old house. Just hearing someone accidentally slam a door lock, she freezes for a few seconds, her eyes flashing with a hint of fear that breaks my heart to see. I rented a small apartment near where we both work. The house isn't big, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a quiet street. But to me, that is truly home. No scolding, no judgmental stares, no dark storage room at the end of the yard. On moving day, I went back to the old house myself. Thao didn't come with me. I didn't want her to see the place where she once cried for help and no one opened the door. While clearing out Thao's drawer, I discovered a small, worn-out blue notebook lying open. Inside, I saw records of many expenses from the past few years. Joint medication for my mother, a wool scarf she liked, low-sugar milk, Ted gifts, medical bills. Every line was written neatly, not to boast, but out of the careful habit of a woman who always wanted to be thorough. I sat silently for a long time in front of that notebook. It turned out that while my mother thought Thao was selfish, Thao had quietly taken care of her more than I ever knew. I brought the notebook for my mother to see, not to blame her, nor to hurt her further, but so she would know how kindly the woman she once locked in a storage room had lived toward her. My mother held the notebook and read every line. Her hand trembled when she reached the page noting the medicine bought after her knee pain, and her tears fell, smudging the ink. She clutched the notebook to her chest, sobbing like a child. I realized it too late, Dad. I sat beside my mother, my heart heavy. I said softly, "Better late than never, Mom. But there are wounds you cannot force others to heal on your own terms." My mother nodded. She didn't argue. From that day on, she stopped calling to force me to bring Thao back to apologize to our relatives, and she didn't bring up keeping family matters behind closed doors anymore. She only occasionally asked if Thao was eating and sleeping well. Each time, I replied briefly, enough for her to know, but also enough to keep a distance for my wife. Hong was later prosecuted for her actions involving illegal detention, coercion, and the unauthorized use of documents. Her loan was separated from our assets after Quan proved that all the house documents had been used without our consent. Kai separated from his wife and took the kids to stay with their maternal grandparents for a while to avoid the upheaval. He works night shifts, shouldering the legal debts he is obligated to settle. But he won't let Hong drag the whole family into the mud anymore. Hong has lost her family, her support system, and the powerful sister-in-law persona she once used to bully Thao. Some say she deserved it. Others say a woman only acts recklessly when pushed to a dead end. I don't want to pass any further judgment. I only know one thing. Hardship gives no one the right to harm others. Financial debts can be repaid, but a debt of 3 days in darkness might take a lifetime to settle. As for my mother, I haven't abandoned her. I still send medicine regularly, keep calling to check on her, and have Kai take her for checkups when the weather changes. But I will not bring her back to live with us. Once, thou herself told me, you can fulfill your filial duties, I won't stop you, but don't force me to return to a place where I begged for help and no one opened the door. Hearing that, I only squeezed her hand tightly. I understand and respect that. One weekend afternoon, my mother came to our new apartment. She didn't ring the doorbell immediately, just stood outside for a long time. Through the peephole, I saw her holding a bag of fruit and a small envelope. I opened the door, but she didn't step in. She just handed me the bag of fruit and said, "Give this to thou." If she doesn't want to see me, I understand. Quote, inside the envelope was a handwritten apology letter. Her handwriting was shaky, and many parts were blurred by tears. Thou read the letter for a long time. She didn't cry, nor did she speak of forgiveness. She only sent a message back to my mother. I hope you live in peace. As for the past, I need time. Reading that message made my heart sink. That was perhaps the kindest way to end it. No hatred, no pretending to be forgiving, and no using kindness to erase mistakes. It's just each person setting their own boundaries. That night, thou slept peacefully in our small apartment. The nightlight cast a warm, soft glow over her face. I sat beside her, listening to my wife's steady breathing, and my heart felt much lighter. I don't think I've defeated anyone. My wife and I don't feel any triumph after all that has happened. We only reclaim the right to live in peace, to be respected, and to step out of a house that once caused us so much pain. After that incident, I understood that filial piety does not mean letting a mother do wrong without anyone daring to speak up. Love also does not mean forcing one's wife to endure humiliation to maintain a facade of peace. Those who sow evil like Hong must ultimately pay the price before the law. Those who are misguided like my mother must live with their regrets. As for thou and me, we are starting over in a small house, where no one fears the sound of a locked door, and where love is no longer used as an excuse to hurt one another. Agreed.